Dr. Aaron Whitfield and Ananya Rao entered Chicago General Hospital carrying very different futures, one protected by status and silence, the other built on sacrifice and quiet resolve. And before the city would learn their names, the hospital would become the place where ambition turned lethal and a hidden truth ended a life that refused to be erased. The hospital on Chicago's South Side looked calm from the outside, a tall glass building glowing softly against the dark city sky. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and recycled air, the kind that never truly felt fresh. Machines hummed constantly, creating a steady rhythm that became normal to those who worked there. Nurses walked quickly between rooms, their faces tired but focused, while doctors moved with confidence shaped by years of routine. Everything followed strict schedules, written protocols, and silent expectations. It was a place designed to heal, but also a place where mistakes and secrets could easily disappear. Among the most respected staff members was a senior surgeon whose name carried weight in every department. His record was flawless, his hands steady, and his presence commanded respect. Administrators trusted him without question, and younger doctors admired his success. His personal life appeared equally perfect, marked by marriage, status, and social approval. No one looked too closely beyond that surface. In hospitals, reputation often replaced curiosity. On a lower floor worked an Indian nurse who had arrived in Chicago years earlier with quiet determination. She kept to herself, focused on long shifts and careful work. Patients remembered her kindness more than her name. She sent part of her earnings back home and spent her free time resting in a small apartment not far from the hospital. Her life followed a simple pattern built on responsibility and patience. She believed discipline and honesty would protect her in a foreign land. Their routines intersected often in sterile corridors and brightly lit operating areas. They exchanged nothing more than brief acknowledgments as work demanded. Cameras watched every corner, access cards recorded every door, and yet the hospital remained full of blind spots. Night shifts especially allowed moments where no one paid attention. In that controlled environment, two lives moved closer with. The secret did not arrive suddenly. It formed slowly, almost unnoticed, hidden behind ordinary days and professional routines. The nurse continued her shifts as usual, but her body carried a change she could not ignore. Fatigue came earlier than before, and moments of dizziness interrupted her focus. She dismissed them at first, blaming long hours and stress. In a hospital, exhaustion was common, and questions were dangerous. Still, medical knowledge has a way of revealing truths no one wants to face. Routine tests confirmed what she had already feared. The results stayed locked inside her thoughts, heavier than any workload. She understood the consequences clearly. Her job, her future, and her dignity all stood at risk. She chose silence, believing time would offer a solution. Each day, she put on her uniform, adjusted her badge, and stepped back into the controlled world of the hospital, hoping no one would notice the quiet panic behind her calm expression. The surgeon noticed the change before anyone else. Years of training had sharpened his ability to read signs others missed. He observed her movements, her pauses, and the way she avoided certain tasks. What he saw triggered fear rather than concern. His life outside the hospital depended on control, secrecy, and appearance. One mistake could collapse everything he had built. In his mind, the hospital was not just a workplace. It was a system he knew how to manipulate. As days passed, the weight of the secret tightened around both of them in different ways. The nurse clung to her beliefs, refusing to take steps that felt wrong to her, even if they promised safety. The surgeon, however, saw the situation as a problem to be solved, not a life to be respected. The sterile walls that once represented order now felt suffocating. What had begun as a hidden truth quietly shifted into a dangerous imbalance of power, setting the stage for decisions that would soon escape control and move toward irreversible consequences. The pressure did not arrive through words or open threats. It appeared quietly inside systems that were supposed to be neutral and fair. The nurse noticed changes in her schedule without explanation. Familiar shifts disappeared, replaced by late nights in isolated wings. Supervisors avoided eye contact, and routine approvals began to take longer than usual. Nothing seemed serious enough to complain about, yet everything felt carefully arranged to make her uncomfortable. Paperwork became another source of strain. Forms appeared in her file that she did not recognize. Performance notes hinted at concerns that had never been raised before. Training sessions she had already completed were suddenly marked as incomplete. Each small problem alone meant little, but together they created a sense of being watched and judged. The hospital that once felt structured now felt unpredictable. The nurse understood how systems could be used against people who lack protection. She had seen others quietly disappear from schedules. Their contracts ended without clear reason. Fear followed her through the corridors, but she remained steady. Her choice had already been made, and she refused to change it out of intimidation. She focused on her work, double-checking every task, determined not to give anyone a real reason to target her. On the other side of this silent struggle, control tightened. Requests moved through internal channels, always justified by policy. Nothing illegal appeared on the surface. Authority blended easily into routine administration. The imbalance of power grew stronger with every unnoticed adjustment. What looked like ordinary management became a method of isolation. As the days passed, the nurse felt increasingly alone inside a building full of people. Trust in the system began to fade, replaced by a quiet awareness of danger. She did not know how far the pressure would go, only that it was building toward something larger. In the absence of spoken confronta, the night unfolded under a low, heavy sky, with rain pressing against the city and streaking the hospital windows. Inside, the building remained brightly lit, untouched by weather, yet something felt different in the air. A scheduled maintenance inspection reduced staff presence in certain wings, a detail logged days earlier and largely ignored. Hallways that were usually busy after midnight stood unusually quiet. Footsteps echoed longer than normal, and the steady rhythm of the hospital felt disrupted. The nurse reported for her shift as assigned, guided toward a restricted area used mainly for overflow and emergency preparation. It was a place few people questioned because it existed just outside daily routine. Access required authorization, and her badge opened the doors without issue. She focused on tasks given to her, unaware of how carefully the night had been shaped around her presence. Every movement appeared ordinary, documented, and routine. Electronic records later showed the surgeon entering the hospital well after his scheduled hours. This was not unusual on paper. Senior staff often came and went freely, especially those with emergency clearance. Security systems registered his badge, cameras captured his movement, and no alerts were triggered. Experience allowed him to blend into the background of authority. At some point, the usual flow of time seemed to pause. Equipment was moved under the justification of preparation. Lights in one section dimmed due to inspection protocol. What should have been transparent became hidden behind procedure. The hospital, built on trust and precision, unknowingly provided cover. By the early hours, the storm outside eased, but inside the building, something irreversible had already taken place. Records would later show activity marked as routine medical handling. Nothing in the moment raised alarms. The systems worked exactly as designed, efficient and silent. It was only later that this night would be examined. The discovery came quietly, without chaos or immediate panic. Just before dawn, a staff member entered a treatment room meant to remain and use during the night. The lights were still on, casting a harsh glow over equipment that appeared recently handled. The nurse lay motionless, positioned in a way that suggested medical intervention rather than violence. At first glance, it looked like a sudden health emergency, the kind hospitals confront every day. Emergency protocols activated automatically. Supervisors arrived, followed by a rapid internal response team. The surgeon appeared among them, calm and efficient, moving with practiced confidence. His presence reassured others, and his authority shaped early assumptions. Notes were taken, vitals reviewed, and timelines loosely formed. The explanation settled quickly around complications related to stress and fatigue, common risks in demanding healthcare environments. By morning, the hospital returned to its usual pace. Patients arrived, phones rang, and announcements echoed through hallways. A brief internal notice acknowledged the death as an unfortunate medical incident. Administrators emphasized privacy and respect, discouraging questions. The nurse's locker was cleared, her schedule quietly removed from the system. To many, it felt like a sad but closed chapter. Yet small details lingered uneasily. Some staff noticed equipment placed where it did not belong. Others remembered seeing access lights activate late at night in a restricted area. A few recalled maintenance protocols that did not fully make sense. These thoughts stayed unspoken, buried under fear of authority and routine exhaustion. The hospital's public statement remained short and controlled. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of what had happened behind clean walls and locked doors. Inside, the case seemed settled, filed away as a tragic loss without suspicion. But beneath that surface, unanswered questions waited. The truth had not disappeared. The story might have ended there if not for the system itself beginning to resist the explanation given to it. A routine internal audit, scheduled weeks earlier and unrelated to the death, triggered a closer look at digital records from that night. Timestamps did not line up cleanly. Certain entries appeared completed faster than possible, while others were logged out of sequence. At first, these inconsistencies were dismissed as software lag or human error. A junior data analyst assigned to Zhengli archival files noticed something unusual in the access logs. One staff badge appeared repeatedly in areas that required no clinical justification at those hours. The pattern was subtle, buried among thousands of normal entries, but it stood out because it belonged to someone whose actions were rarely questioned. The analyst flagged it quietly, unsure of its significance. At the same time, backup servers restored deleted files as part of routine maintenance. Among them were medical notes that conflicted with the official report. Dosage records had been altered, and timestamps showed edits made after the nurse had already been declared unresponsive. These discoveries created discomfort rather than immediate alarm. In a hospital, challenging senior authority carried risks few were willing to take. Security footage added another layer of doubt. One camera covering the restricted wing showed a slight change in angle days before the incident, reducing visibility near the treatment room. The adjustment had been logged as maintenance-related, but no matching work order could be found. What once seemed like coincidence now looked deliberate. Whispers began to move through administrative offices. Questions formed cautiously, framed as compliance concerns rather than accusations. The calm certainty surrounding the case started to fracture. Each new detail weakened the original explanation, revealing a carefully shaped narrative rather than an honest account. The internal review shifted direction once patterns became impossible to ignore. Investigators expanded their scope, no longer limiting themselves to procedural checks. They traced digital fingerprints across multiple systems, mapping access, edits, and movements over several weeks. What emerged was a clear sequence of control rather than coincidence. Authority had been used repeatedly to shape outcomes, always within policy language, always just short of raising alarms. Medical orders tied to the night of the incident were examined closely. Several lacked secondary authorization, something normally required but often overlooked when senior staff were involved. The timing of those orders suggested urgency without emergency. Cross-referencing schedules revealed that the nurse had been reassigned multiple times without clinical justification, always ending up more isolated. These decisions, once invisible, now formed a trail. Attention turned toward motive. Financial records showed no distress, but personal risk appeared elsewhere. The surgeon's carefully maintained public life contrasted sharply with the private consequences he faced. Investigators noted how quickly the original explanation had been accepted and who benefited most from its closure. What once looked like leadership now appeared as influence. When oversight committees became involved, the hospital's tone changed. Legal counsel reviewed every action. External authorities were notified quietly, without public announcement. Evidence was preserved, and access privileges were temporarily limited. The surgeon's movements became restricted for the first time, and his absence was explained as routine leave. As pressure increased, attempts to control the narrative failed. Data does not respond to reputation. Logs, backups, and timestamps aligned with growing clarity. The truth no longer depended on interpretation, but on structure. By the time formal charges were prepared, the arrest sent shockwaves through the hospital and far beyond its walls. Staff who once moved with confidence now questioned every routine they had trusted. Administrators faced intense scrutiny, forced to explain how authority had gone unchecked for so long. News of the case spread quickly, shaking public faith in a place meant to protect life. The building itself seemed changed, its bright corridors now associated with silence and loss. The nurse's story began to surface through court records and investigative reports. Her background, her discipline, and her quiet resilience became known to people who had never spoken her name before. Community groups gathered outside the hospital, demanding accountability and stronger protections for vulnerable workers. What had once been treated as an internal matter turned into a symbol of deeper systemic failure. Inside the courtroom, evidence spoke louder than reputation ever had. Digital records, access logs, and altered files formed a timeline that could not be undone. The surgeon's past achievements offered no defense against the weight of documented actions. The case concluded not with mystery, but with clarity built from data and process. Justice arrived without drama, firm and final. In response, the hospital introduced sweeping reforms. Access privileges were tightened, oversight expanded, and anonymous reporting systems strengthened. Training programs emphasized ethical responsibility alongside clinical skill. These changes came too late for one life, but they reshaped the institution's future. Long after the trial ended, the memory remained. For many, the nurse represented courage in the face of silent pressure. Her story served as a warning about power, control, and the danger of unquestioned authority. The city moved forward, but the lessons stayed behind, etched into policy and memory alike. In a place built on trust, the cost of ignoring truth had finally been revealed.